Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today? This is Steve Brummer, co-founder and partner at IoT Group, your moderator and host of the Fabio executive briefing series that we've been doing. We are on number 5. Fabio, I can't believe they're still allowing us to do this. So the subjects have been great. So this is an educational executive series that we're trying to get across. This will only be about 20 or 25 minutes long. No sales pitching going on here. It's all about trying to better educate ourselves with different guests that come on that Fabio basically bribes to come on, because who the hell wants to talk to you and I on a 20-minute basis. So the format of the day is introductions from all of us, and then we go into a series of Q&A for the 20 minutes, and we banter back and forth. This is very lively, as you can tell, so that we do not, so we have some fun doing this. It's another boring 20-minute scenario. So anyway, Fabio, who are you? What's your company? What do you do for a living? If anybody out there in Tago land does not know who you are.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. So I'm Fabio Rosa. I'm the CEO and co-founder of TagoIO, located here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We are a global team, and we basically designed IoT cloud platform that make it much easier for developers and business developers, not only technical guys, to build a complete IoT solution. We really say that it goes beyond the IoT solution. It's not only the charts and die, but it's really about communicate with other systems, adding a lot of functionality for analytics and so on. So we built that, and now we have more than 90,000 accounts of developers with more than 1,200 IoT solutions. Is scaling up, takes some time, but it's scaling up. And the customers can design by themselves. So some cases they ask our help, most of the cases they go online. And Steve, today is really great. Very happy to be here, special with Chris, our neighbor here in North Carolina, just a couple of miles from our headquarters, one of our first customer. So it is great time here, and I hope the topic will be very valuable, not only from the cloud perspective, but now the topic is more the hardware. So it'll be this for Chris to help us here.
Excellent. Come on, Chris, tell us about you. Tell us about the company. What do you do?
All right, I'm Chris Lamb. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Device Solutions. We started Device Solutions back in 2003, so 18 years ago, give or take, when we escaped from Sony Ericsson, where we had been designing cell phones for a decade or two between us, and working with the carriers and things like that. So have really long relationships in IoT, or M2M as it used to be called, and consumer electronics. So here at Device Solutions today, we focus on designing the guts inside the things of the Internet of Things. So we make the sensors and gateways, all kinds of communicating devices that are body-worn, medical devices, industrial, that are out there. We do the embedded firmware and software, and we send that data to our partners like Fabio, who is our really key partner for our Celio product, which is used in some smart agriculture applications and cold chain applications.
Excellent. And for everybody out there, Steve Brummer, IoT Group, we are a leading IoT strategy advisory firm, helping companies with their monetization, commercialization, go-to-market strategies and the execution of those, because everybody can go to Fabio for the platform and the integration. They can go to Chris and get the products, but then they got to figure out how to sell it and make money. And so we spend most of our time on how to make money in the IoT space. So the first question I have for you, Chris, is trying to educate us on LoRa versus LoRaWAN. We're hearing LoRaWAN all over the place with the various network providers that are doing it, but it all started out from this LoRa thing. Can you give us an educated idea as to the LoRa versus LoRaWAN definitions and use cases?
I'll try. That's a lot of ground to cover and not get into too much detail, but LoRa is a radio technology, a spread spectrum kind of radio technology that was invented, I think, back in France a number of years ago and acquired and commercialized by Simtech. But it's just a radio protocol, sort of like your FM radio in your car. Anything can be broadcast over that. but you got to agree on all the details in between. You know, what's the bandwidth, how many bits, what's the modulation width, all these details have to be agreed on, and what format are you going to send the data. So LoRa is a basic building block, very simple, just here's how you send some bits. LoRaWAN takes that and defines how to use those bits in packets, how to join a network, how to build a network, how to find a network if you're a device, so that when you turn on your device, it knows how to scan, find a channel, broadcast, you know, hey, I'm here, and then be authenticated and provisioned on that network. So LoRaWAN is the WAN part really that builds on top of a very basic radio. LoRaWAN is designed for a very specific set of applications. So things like water meters and many of the other devices out there are very well suited. They can wake up once in a while, say I'm here, get their message across, get maybe a little bit of feedback and go back to sleep. That's the most prevalent way to use that. LoRaWAN had a little bit more trouble. It's, you know, being standardized when you needed to send larger amounts of data for things like photo. So those features are being added, but they were not necessarily there at the beginning. We use LoRa, for example, in several products that we've done. Our Celio product, we use LoRa. We designed it back in 2G cellular days. So small amounts of data, they were expensive, they were slow. So the cellular and the LoRa part lined up pretty well in terms of size and basic performance characteristics. But we also included from the beginning the ability to update the firmware over there and things like that. So we were able to customize the protocol and the implementation end-to-end to meet the needs of other particular products and the end-to-end solution. But we have, you know, several applications like that.
And Fabio, when the developers that you're working with come to you, are there a fair amount of them doing just LoRa and or LoRaWAN? And how does Tago handle that? Is it the same platform? It's just kind of agnostic whether it's LoRa or LoRaWAN?
Yeah, that's a great point. So getting data to TagoIO needs to respect our, let's say, protocol or APIs, okay? So when customers work with LoRaWAN, so they need to select a LoRaWAN network server. And we already integrate with most of them around the globe. A lot of them are ready to go. Here in the US, in Europe, Latin America, Asia, is very straightforward to get the data to us. Minimal effort, maybe just a parse or decode the data a little bit. When it's LoRa, then it can be a little bit different. You need to add sometimes a middleware, something to translate their protocol. Okay. What we have seen, answer maybe your first part of the question, is like most now are in the LoRaWAN. That's what I have seen from our side. In terms of number, what happened is that sometimes there are one customer with only LoRa, let's say very basic protocol, but a very big number of devices.
So one of the things that the whole topic of this session is why is hardware design so hard? And so, Chris, why is it so hard? I mean, there's a lot of aspects of it, right? We have to do the design, we have to figure out what it's going to look like, battery life, certification, what network it's going to be on, how big is the processor. Is that why it's so hard?
Well, that's certainly a lot of the reasons. You know, the first one starts off is you have to actually physically build something, and you have to build it out of the available parts. So we're constrained by what we can get. Do they work like we want them to? And like they say they will, they don't always. And then it takes, you know, typically weeks to have PC boards made, assembled. And right now with the pandemic, it's almost impossible to get parts, tens of weeks and out to a year or two. In fact, I've heard some vendors are quoting 2-year lead times, 104 weeks. So just getting it physically assembled, you know, increases the time. And then same problem we have in software, but of course those iterations make it hard. Nobody knows necessarily what they really want until they see it. So often you spend weeks and weeks developing it and building it, and you find out it's not quite exactly right. A little harder to iterate. And because it interacts with the real world, it's, you know, a little bit more important in some ways. You have to fit in the physical space that's required. You know, you have to use the battery power that you're limited to. You can't exceed what's available due to the size and things like that. And there's an awful lot of physics involved. We can't make the device smaller than a certain amount if we want the antenna to perform a certain way. We can't shrink the size of the battery. If you want to, you know, turn on a bright light for a long time, it's going to require that size, you know, that many electrons, and they only pack so densely these days. So there's a lot of physical constraints like that, as well as things like robustness. How do we keep it, waterproof if we're integrating in mechanics? How do the users interact with it? Then there's lots of software inside the hardware, so to speak. That kind of firmware is also what we do, and that can add another layer as we iterate through that often. So those are some of the real world concerns. And you interact with a lot of platforms. So we may interact with Fabio. If we're using Lorawan, that defines one set of protocols, one set of constraints at the lowest level for us when we can transmit and how much. And then another set of constraints, what does Fabio's platform, what does the Tago platform require us to send? How do we format that? And then how do you access it?
Right. And so Fabio, keeping on that same trend, all these hardware vendors that are coming to you with products that Chris has designed and built, when do you get involved from a platform standpoint and API integration standpoint in the process with Chris's customers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it's a little bit more technical, let's say just about the protocol. So the conversation is basically between TagoIO and the device solutions, right? So the customer is really not much involved in that. One is very technical. If the customer came through device solutions will decide, hey, do I need to talk with the TagoIO right now, or we figure out here, engage them later. When it's about the business or the input, output, visualization, and analytics and data aggregation, we may be normally involved a little bit early in the stage. Just make sure that the cost will be okay, not for the development, right, but for the longer run, right? So it really depends, but normally the sooner the better, right? So just to, at least to have the first discussion and evaluate the risk. I always say, hey, start with the most complex, the hardest question first, okay? You need to have the courage to talk about that. Then let the other things you're gonna fit more natural.
You brought up protocols, but what about, when we talk about protocols and connectors and all those other pieces that these hardware manufacturers, sometimes they're not thinking about it. How do you go through those discussions, Fabio?
Yeah, that's really with the partner like a Device Solutions, right? Again, because we have this relationship where Device Solutions understand very well the other side, although they don't do that, they can judge this very easily, right? So we need a connector. We need to decode that information and not only send the data to TAG, but also send the data back to control something. Right. So normally that part is not the hardest part. I think most of the work will be on the hardware side. For us, it's kind of just a command. So you need just to decode, and of course, need to make the decision when to send it back. But the communication, what's normally a little bit more complex, not complex, but take a little bit more time. Maybe if you have a very low level protocol using LoRa, like TCP/IP, so maybe there are a lot of commands. It's just a little bit more work, but Device Solution in this case, they can anticipate what's the problem, how big this is, and when to engage us.
It's really, like he said earlier, is better, right? Because the user is looking at the end-to-end solution. They don't care, they shouldn't care what the protocol is, hopefully, right? They just want a dashboard and an alert. And so the sooner that we can collaborate on that and really make that happen and make those decisions early in the design process to optimize what data is processed when. So we monitor, helium tanks. We probably wouldn't want to send data every minute or every hour up to Tago. That's a lot of data to store just to detect leaks. We can look at the delta over the last hour and decide whether there's a leak local to the device. Is a very simple edge analytics. So making those kinds of trade-offs early, understanding the customer's sensitivities and needs end to end, it's really key that we talk about those kinds of things, even more important than how we format the bits.
Chris, one of the things that Device Solutions is known for is its testing and certification capabilities. And, old days, we spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars with carriers to get certified on 3G. It took a long, long time to get done, and most people didn't even plan economically that was going to cost them that kind of money and time. Has things changed around testing and certification? Has it gotten easier? Now that we're dealing with, a unlicensed spectrum scenario from a LoRaWAN standpoint, has that made any difference between going with that and running out a CAD-M, LTE-M, NB-IoT type of device?
I'd say it's certainly different. Whether it's better or not, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Easier?
So yeah, in the old days, it was pretty easy to spend $50,000 just to go through the AT&T PTCRB process. And with CAD M1, it's more like $10,000. That of course assumes that you pass the first time. And if you want to pass the first time, you probably had to plan ahead and budget for that at the first time. So if you don't plan, you probably won't pass. And that's sort of regardless of Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or cellular or LoRa. They all have certification programs, Mariota as well. If you don't plan ahead, you're probably going to iterate. And if you iterate quickly, you may find yourself a little surprised. The carriers have gotten a lot more streamlined to work with, let's say. They've recognized that the number of devices can't have the same level of touch that they used to have. Right. But they still have some pretty strict requirements for things like antenna performance. And we see the same kind of requirements on the satellite vendors when we work with them. So device performance, noise levels, antennas are really key, and how you integrate those into the product. That's one of the things that makes hardware hard. We have to, that's driven by the physics. It's not going to work as well when it's next to your body. It's not going to work as well when it's small. So there's a lot of negotiations there on how to optimize those things. The Lorawan program is evolving. We haven't taken a device through their formal certification, and for the US, I think it's still rolling out. Yeah. But the key is to get ahead. We always test as early as we can to make sure that we're compliant to any specs we need. And we have great facilities here in RTP. We don't actually run the lab, but we prepare the devices. We go in the lab, we troubleshoot them, and make sure that we're ready to go the first time. So we just finished taking like our CAD M1 cellular device, cellular device through Verizon and the FCC, and that went overall pretty smoothly. But you've got to plan ahead. The worst calls we get are the people who call us and say, "Hey, I just learned about PTCRB. I'm of course 6 months to a year late already. I've already failed. Can you help?" And we get their data, and sometimes it's pretty bad. One time we managed to fix it in software, but it's not unusual that it takes two board spins or maybe even 3, depending upon how complex it is. If you haven't followed best practices, it's really not worth the time to troubleshoot it until we kind of redesign it to implement some basics, and then we can find out the remaining noise sources and things like that.
Yeah, the whole certification process has not necessarily gotten easier, better, faster, quicker, more economical in the last 10, 20 years of doing this. It's incredible that it's still there, and you still have the certification houses you have to go through. Chris, you brought up something that I wanted to ask Fabio about, which was data and the value of that data, and the whole idea of data being the true value within the IoT world, because that's what people are wanting. Whether it's got to be, you take the data out of your device that comes through Fabio's Tago platform and do something with that data. So Fabio, how much conversation are you having with prospects and customers around the value of the data throughout the process?
Yeah, for sure is a lot, right? You're right. I think that's the key point of the conversation. I don't think there is anyone that coming to us or even thinking, right? If you could imagine what they're thinking, that here, wow, I don't need their data, right? At the end of the day, it's about data. So visualization real time and alarms, alerts is very important. Of course, you need the data for that. But if you expand a little bit, it's okay. As they aggregate and store this data, they already think about how can I use this in the future? How can I create a new business model? How can I look back and try to improve something and combine data and try to get some correlation? For example, something started to sell more than other, and then because of that event that happened, they found a correlation. So a lot of the companies are really think about that. So even the IoT, when you have just a little bit, let's say, data points, right? It's not like a big video stream, things like that. These are already very valuable. The only challenge that you see is that the whole organization needs to be set to go in this direction, right? So although I see almost everybody coming to us with this in mind, I don't think it's just with us. I think overall in the industry. And by the way, I just read an article other day from Harvard Business Review saying that why companies are failing in the initiative to be recognized as a data-driven organization. They say, what is getting down? And the reality is that getting down, they did a survey with almost 100 companies, big companies, and year by year, the last 3 years, this number reduced. So companies that thought was very really data-driven company, they are not. But again, that's not only IoT. So
No.
right? But my point is, when you bring IoT, that's really data. So if you are structured to analyze the data, is easy go. If you want to bring IoT, but you don't structure other data that you have, you're gonna just have a little bit more time to combine that information and make the decision. But at the end of the day, Steve, people really want to take action. So that's why you normally say to customer, hey, take some steps. You can think big, but take some steps and change the needle, move the needle a little bit. And I think that's where they are successful. So not only dashboards, not only alerts, and use these to learn with the data. And they are doing that. I think these bring some value.
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of things that we do in our practice, our methodology is starting at the end user and working our way backwards. Looking at the end user, understanding exactly what the value of the watch, the widget, the device, the application, the use cases, and the data value. And what are you doing with that? And then working the way backwards to you, Chris, what's this product going to look like? Does it go on my wrist? Does it go in my car? What is all the attributes of that piece of hardware and the firmware and the processor and capabilities to the platform and the applications and everything else, but trying to understand what the hell you're doing with it at the end and working our way backwards. So as we come up on the end of our executive briefing session, the last question I want to ask both of you is, Chris, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges that you're having to handle on a daily basis in your business as it relates to our current business climate as well as customers' expectations?
Right. So there are a couple of key challenges. Right now, the biggest one is components. Like I mentioned earlier, if Ford and GM can't get parts to build their most profitable vehicles, somebody that the vendors have never heard of is going to have an even harder time. So literally, we're getting ready to build 1,000 pieces of something, and they said, well, maybe we'll give you those parts in 2022. So it's really a huge problem. We always have a problem in terms of customer expectations around, it's sort of related to components, but it's in my Apple phone, my iPhone, and I paid $100 for it. Why is it so hard for you to put a camera in my IoT device? And if you're not dealing on that scale of design and integration, you just don't have the same levers, and you can't even, again, the vendors won't sell you the components if you don't have 500,000 piece volume guaranteed. And you don't have the manufacturing capabilities of Foxconn or somebody behind you. So those are really two of the biggest. And of course, physics. I want it to be smaller. I want it to last longer. Just trying to line up with that, and then align the data expectation. No, you can't stream every bit of data to Tago because we can't support it from a battery life or protocol point of view, and you can't afford to store that much data. And even though your IoT device may send relatively small amount of data, we are monitoring a few grain feed bins. We send a few values per hour, and we have to go in every week or two and start cleaning that data out because it accumulates quickly. And if you really have a massive IoT opportunity, you better be planning that data end to end and how you're going to manage that from day one, because the cloud providers like to make it cheap to get in and expensive to get out. So plan ahead for that as well.
You brought up about 5 subjects that can make this executive briefing go into another hour or two, because a lot of the topics you mentioned, are critically important, because you're not Foxconn. And so getting components affects so many people in that supply chain across the board, especially in the small, medium-sized arenas, which are the key to our success. And we're not getting answers as to when this is ever going to end, and think of the causes of it. Everybody's got answers and reasons for everything, but It's you brought up some excellent points that's why people come to the three of us for help, because we have to figure out if there's, in Chris, in your case, is there an alternative component that you can use? You know, is there already a pre-made product that you can, you know, kind of retrofit to fit what they're trying to accomplish? So, and the same thing with you, Fabio. I mean, you know, you have some big challenges that people come to you with on all fronts. So what are some of the biggest ones that you're handling right now?
Yeah, it's a lot about the expectation, you know, similar what Chris said, for sure. Our customer needed the device, right? So for sure that's impacted us as well.
Sure.
So we have a customer that coming to us say, hey, okay, we are going to evaluate Tago, but we don't care about the first 1,000 devices. We want to go with 100,000 devices, and now they are not going there, right? It's taking more time, and then this impact your part, Steve. Let's say the ROI, return of investment, right? So that's important when you talk to customer. Really think about the long term. And by the way, that is what I believe one reason why some initiatives really fail, right? If you try to get this investment, have a hardware that can take years to certify, implement in 1 year. I don't know, I don't have the data here, but my experience says, no way, it's not gonna happen, right? It's gonna take years because the hardware that's part of the IoT, although we don't manufacture, we don't design, it will be years in the field, mainly when the industrial device, I don't know how many years, Chris, for 10 years minimum that you design, right?
Yes.
So that's the long-term investment. So it should be flexible. And our platform is always changing, but the hardware is there, right? You cannot go there in the field next year and change. I mean, you can, that's very expensive. So it's a lot, our challenge is about the expectation. I think the customers are getting a lot of new information. They're getting much better now. And then for me is, okay, we have challenges with supply chain currently, but it's the fundamental is still return on investment, right? Pay attention about that and take some risk. Not the technology, okay? That technology you figure out, right? We are gonna fix and find the best solution. But for the source of revenue, where you're gonna save money and to pay your project, I think is one challenge is really think about it a little bit about the long term. I know that's not the easy, but we need to think to succeed.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. This concludes our 5th episode of the TagoIO Executive Briefing Series. Fabio, can we tell everybody about next month's?
Yeah, I think so.
We can. So we are going to have the CEO of Sigfox next month as our guest, where we'll be talking about all kinds of things, investments around public networks and their franchise model, and God only knows where that conversation is going to go. So join us next month. You'll get notices from all of us. Go to our LinkedIn pages and everything, and you'll be able to get contact. But Chris, as always, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you being a guest with us. Fabio, as usual, great co-host with me, and appreciate you doing these and sponsoring these things. And for all of you, hopefully you learned something today. Our whole intention with these executive briefing series are to make them under a half hour and give you some education on some new areas within the IoT space. So thank you all for joining us. Till next month, this is Steve Brummer from IoT Group. See ya. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.